What's up, everyone? Today we're here in the mountains. We're pretty high up at about 2,000 meters altitude, and we're kinda in the clouds right now, which explains why it's so foggy around here. Anyway, I've set up my tent over here, which is the R.E.I. Flashair 1. I briefly mentioned some things about it in my last video where I showed all of my gear, but this will be an in-depth review on this tent. By the way, if you haven't watched it, go check it out. I'll link to that over here. I've used this tent for about 6 months now. So far I've used it in Latvian forests, Norwegian fjords, northern Finland or Lapland, and the mountains here in southern Spain. I've slept in it in rainy nights, very windy nights, warmer nights, and in freezing temperatures. So this by no means isn't a first impressions or an unboxing video. It's getting pretty cold as well. So I bought the R.E.I. Co-op Flashair 1 for $199 on a sale, but right now when I'm filming this video, it's $249. Still, it's one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, ultralight tents that you can get. All included, it weighs 750 grams or 26.5 ounces, which is like incredibly light and definitely considered ultralight. It's a trekking pole tent, which means that you can use your trekking pole for setting it up. Actually, right now it's set up with my other trekking pole. This way you can save a few more grams by not bringing the main pole, which is included with the tent, by the way. Without the main pole, the total weight is reduced to about 700 grams or 24.7 ounces. If you want to, you can go even lighter than that by not using all the storage bags for the tent and by not bringing this smaller repair thing over here. Without all that, the total weight is reduced to 650 grams or about 23 ounces. The tent comes with 5 DAC aluminum stakes and 4 guy lines. The stakes feel pretty durable and light, weighing at 59 grams or 2 ounces for all 5 stakes. By the way, you don't need additional stakes for the guy lines. Having just 5 is enough. For weight saving purposes, it's made in a single wall design, and overall it's made from very thin materials. They don't really mention the exact materials, but it's made from a very thin polyurethane or silicone coated nylon. Ideally, you'd want to use a footprint underneath this tent to protect it from sharp rocks and branches. But because I'm a badass and I don't give a shit, I haven't used one up to this point. Nothing has happened so far, but a few days ago I actually ordered the dedicated footprint from R.E.I. for this tent, which costs about $45, I think. If you want to save some money and probably some weight as well, just use a regular tarp that you got off Home Depot and cut it in the right size. And now I'll show you how to set up this tent. Fun fact, I'm actually filming this before filming anything else. Smart. Everything's kept in this bag over here, and as you can see, it's pretty tiny and it doesn't take up basically any space in your backpack. One thing that I sometimes do is take out the poles from the bag because they're kinda long, and I store them at the side of my backpack. That way the rest of the tent squishes down to a very small size. To set it up, the first thing that you need to do is select a good campsite. This one actually looks pretty good. It's pretty flat, it doesn't have many rocks, so I'll build my tent over here. Once you've selected a good campsite, the next thing that you need to do is stake out all 4 corners with using 4 stakes. I'll show you how to do that right now. After that, you need to insert this pole into the foot end of this tent. By the way, it's pretty hard to put the pole in there and then take it out, which is why I just leave it in there and never take it out. The next thing that you need to do is unzip the main zipper, which is for the main vestibule. And you need to insert this pole over here on top of the tent. After that, you need to insert the main pole or your trekking pole. I'll build it up with the main pole now and show you how to use it with a trekking pole in just a little bit. So the bottom part goes in over here and the top part goes in the smaller hole of the top pole, just like this. And after that, you need to clip this clip around the main pole. So now you need to close the main zipper, just like this, and stake out the vestibule with your 5th and last stake. When adjusting this string, you need to go to the side of the tent and make sure that it's sitting up pretty straight. Right now, it looks pretty straight to me. After that, you need to even everything out. You do that by looping these orange cords on each corner around each stake, just like this. So it's already looking better, but what you need to do now is adjust the length of each of these orange cords. You got one on each corner and one over here. This is kind of the trickiest part on getting an even pitch, but you'll get used to it. Just make sure that the tent looks straight from all sides. If it's very windy outside, you'll probably want to use the guy lines as well. It's kind of windy today, so I'll definitely use them. There's a loop on each corner in the middle part of the tent for the guy line, and the second part goes around your stake over here. And you just adjust the tension until it looks good. And you do that in all four corners. When I first got this tent, the whole setup took me about 10 to 15 minutes to get a good pitch, but now I think I can do it in about 5 if I need to. What I'm saying is you get used to it, and once you do that, it's pretty easy to set up. Okay, and now I'll show you how to set it up with a tracking pole. Basically, you just replace the main pole with a tracking pole. I measured it before and it needs to be about 98 centimeters or 38.5 inches in height. So let's start by taking out the main pole. The bottom part of the tracking pole goes over here around this string, and the top part goes inside the larger hole on the top pole, just like this. When you set it up with a tracking pole, you need to put this clip over here around this thing, not around the tracking pole. And the last thing that you do is adjust the height of your tracking pole. I'm thinking something like this looks pretty good. So the R.E.I. Flash Air 1 is a pretty small tent. It's about 88 inches or 220 centimeters in length, 35 inches or 88 centimeters in width on one end, and 27 inches or 68 centimeters in width at the foot end. Just telling you if you want to know if your sleeping pad fits in there. Now I'll quickly put my sleeping pad in there, the R.E.I. Co-op Flash Thermal Long Mummy in there, and show you how much space there's left. I usually keep my sleeping pad on one side and all of my gear on the other side, just like I've put it now. As you can see, there's not too much space, but it's enough for all of your gear if you want to put it inside. Sometimes I'll keep some of my stuff outside, but I've heard that there are way too many foxes here that like to steal your food, so I just keep everything inside. When I'm in my sleeping bag, usually my head and my feet will barely touch the walls of the tent. So if there's a little bit of condensation on there, your sleeping bag will probably get a bit wet. If it isn't too windy outside, usually I won't touch the walls of the tent, but today it's pretty windy, so it's blowing this wall on top of the sleeping bag, and if I were to sleep here, I'd probably brush against the walls of the tent on my head over here and down at the footwell as well, probably. If I want to stand up, I can do that, but only barely. I mean, not like stand up literally, but stand up like this. If I want to, I can change my clothes. Sometimes I'll eat inside here if it's too cold or too windy outside. So this tent isn't definitely large, but it offers enough room for my most basic needs. By the way, in height, I'm 185 centimeters or 6 feet and 1 inches. So if I lay down, my feet don't touch the walls. My head doesn't touch the wall as well, but I could see this tent being too small for some taller people. I'd say the maximum height that would be suitable for this tent would be about 190 to maybe 195 centimeters, but definitely not much more than that. So inside it's got this thing on top, which I guess is there for hanging a lantern, but I think that a small plastic hook would have been better because I could hang my headlamp on there. So this is only useful if you're using a lantern. In terms of pockets, it only has this small triangle pocket over here and nothing else. So yeah, in terms of livability, it offers just the bare bones, but I guess that's to be expected with any ultralight tent. And it also isn't an issue for me personally because I'm just using it as a shelter. I've slept in this tent in rain only once. Nothing crazy like a rainstorm or something, but just some mediocre rain for the most part of the night. Maybe a bit more than mediocre. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage from that night, but as far as I can tell, it wasn't leaking anywhere. I saw a video where this guy, CHRISGOESOUTDOORS, tested this tent in a rainstorm, and he found out that his tent was actually leaking near the zipper on top, right over here. I think it's a production defect for his tent specifically, because mine definitely isn't leaking. And by reading the reviews on R.E.I, it doesn't seem to be an occurring problem. So yeah, this tent is waterproof, at least for me. I've tested the R.E.I FlashAir1 in pretty windy conditions on my last trip to the high mountains. The forecast showed wind speeds up to 45 meters per second, and I kept it in kind of an open place similar to this one with only a little bit of cover. So the tent held up really nicely. However, I knew that the winds would be pretty harsh during the night, so I prepared for that in advance by placing a large rock in each corner on top of all of the strings and the guy lines, and placing another smaller rock behind the stake so that the stakes have no way to come out basically. It's getting pretty cloudy here and also cold. When I was taking the tent down in the morning, as soon as I removed the rocks around the stake, the next wind gust instantly blew out one of these stakes. So if it's windy, you have to use rocks basically. Now, if there's a lot of wind outside, one annoying thing is that usually the sidewalls will flap around and hit your face and feet quite a lot. So you have to tuck your sleeping bag around you nice and tightly if you want to actually get some sleep in the night. And if there's some condensation on the walls, it will just keep splashing on your face for the whole night. So yeah, that's pretty annoying. I'm going to be honest with you guys and say that this tent is pretty bad at dealing with condensation. I'll link to a good video where CHRISGOESOUTDOORS tested this tent in a pretty heavy rainstorm. Towards the end of the video, you can basically see the worst case scenario that could happen with this tent. That said, I've never had that much condensation from my own experience. In fact, not even close to what he experienced in that video. The worst I've had is just some droplets forming on the walls, which weren't necessarily leaking down to the bottom of the tent. But from moving around, my sleeping bag and my sleeping pad got a bit wet. They dried out in about 20 minutes in the morning, so nothing crazy. That happened once, and keep in mind that I've slept in this tent quite a few times already. The FlashAir1 is so bad at condensation because it doesn't provide enough ventilation. The only ventilation that you get is from this gap underneath the vestibule with tiny mesh panels on two corners and an opening at the top of the tent. From what I've heard, a lot of single wall ultralight tents are bad at condensation. So if you're into ultralight hiking, that's just something that you'll have to deal with. Personally, I don't find this an issue because I usually hike up in higher altitudes like here, and southern Spain is pretty dry in general. So even if I pitch this tent next to a small lake or whatever, I don't get any serious condensation. The worst I had was in northern Finland or Lapland, where we camped pretty close to a lake. My sleeping bag got a bit wet, but nothing serious. By the way, if it isn't raining outside and if it isn't too windy, you can just open up the main vestibule and you won't have any issues with condensation. I love that it opens up so widely, which means that it offers some nice views during the night and in the morning. That said, you should think twice about buying this tent if you live somewhere humid or somewhere with a lot of rain, because you'll be probably dealing with a lot more condensation than me. But now, let's get into the meat and bones of this video, my final verdict. So, would I recommend this tent? For some people I would, and for some I wouldn't. The worst issue, obviously, is the condensation, but if you're living in a drier place, or in a colder place, or if you'll be using it up in higher altitudes like me, it won't really be an issue. By the way, if you want a tent with better condensation, the first choice would be to get a more expensive ultralight tent with better condensation performance, such as the Z-Packs Altiplex or something from Hyperlight Mountain Gear. But expect to pay 2 or sometimes even 3 times as much, and the condensation still won't be perfect. The second option would be to get something heavier and probably a bit more expensive as well, but with a double wall system, such as the R.E.I. Co-op Quarterdome, the Big Agnes Fly Creek, or the Nemo Hornet. I haven't tested them personally, so I can't tell you if they're good or not, but I've seen some pretty good reviews. But for me personally, I still consider this tent to be the best ultralight option that I can find. In weight, it's very hard to find something lighter, and if it is, it's also 2 or 3 times as expensive. It's kind of difficult to set up, but it gets faster once you get used to that. Personally, I don't see the condensation to be that big of an issue. It's also fully waterproof, and it's very good at staying in place in very windy conditions. But at the same time, I understand that it's not for everyone. By the way, I've placed links to this tent and some other gear that I use personally in the video description, so make sure to check that out. I hope this video was helpful to you, and I guess I'll see you in my next video, but only if you subscribed. Bye!